morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of Law in Life. I would like to acknowledge the Darkinjung people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and to acknowledge their elders past, present and future. Today we will be talking about the things that you should be considering in advance to get your business ready for sale. I'm joined today by Phil Keenan. Phil is a chartered accountant with Bishop Collins and has a high level of experience in tax, asset protection, business planning and business sales. Next to Phil is Nic Koffel. Nic is a director of Aubrey Brown Lawyers and heads up the commercial law team. Nic has a significant amount of experience on business sales and purchases and all things commercial law. And we're also joined by Zoran Sarabaka. Zoran is a principal and business broker with Exclusive Business Brokers. Zoran is highly experienced in assisting people with selling small to large businesses across a broad range of industries. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today.
Thanks, Anna.
So let's dive in. Nic, I'll start with you. How do clients typically sell their business?
There's probably three ways that businesses are sold. The first, the most simple, is an asset sale, where the assets of a particular business are identified, and then those assets are transferred from a vendor, the owner, to a purchaser.
Phil, how far ahead should people plan when they're looking to sell their business, and what type of tax planning can they do?
Yeah, great. So, look, it's always a tricky one because it will always depend in terms of whether the business is sale ready. So, look, I mean, in circumstances where you have kind of the owner doing a lot of the activities in a business, it's in their interest to try and think about how they're actually operating their business and potentially leverage off other people to perform those roles, because that's how they'll maximize the value from that sale, because you can't really sell yourself. So that's what we typically recommend for clients that are transitioning through that process. So, you know, if your affairs in order, you've got good structure, processes and systems, you can usually get to market within a few months, but it can take a little longer.
Now, over the years, you and I and Nic, we've had some interesting experiences when clients are looking to sell their business and consideration is being given to their tax planning. And I remember one that we did a few years ago now, where probably 3 months before the business went to market, and it was pretty clear that that was where the clients were headed. The clients decided to transfer half of the shares they owned. There were 2 business owners to their wives, and that created a big problem, didn't it?
It sure did. And look, there's the small business CGT concessions, which is what we're talking about, clients' ability to access those. Small businesses are typically defined as businesses with turnover of less than $2 million, or where the group assets sit underneath $6 million, and that includes a range of things, but it also excludes personal homes, superannuation, and personal use assets. But when you're selling a business or you're selling shares in a business, structural considerations are super important. Those concessions are complex, and it's important that you get really good advice before you undertake the transaction, because we have seen circumstances where clients have dividend access shares, which gives them the ability to access profits before and while they're trading that particular business. But that can create some problems in terms of accessing small business CGT concessions when they go to sell that particular business. And equally, any share transfers or movements that you're doing just before a transaction occurs will also create some complications in terms of accessing those concessions as well.
Thanks, Phil. Zoran, you're dealing with vendors and purchasers daily. What are the types of things that you've experienced that cause delays or cause issues when a purchaser has been found and you're actually in the throes of putting the deal together?
There's many, but 2 main ones are information, access to the information, and what the owner is prepared to disclose in certain times and what is not, because it's afraid that it's going to cause a damage to the business. And the other one is disclosure. So disclosure about risks, and the risks are there. You can't avoid them. It's a business. That's why values are what the values are, and you're getting a better return on investment. but playing down the risks or issues that haven't been crystallized, it becomes a problem. So if you don't disclose these points and purchaser actually finds them, first thing they think, well, what else you're not telling me? Mm-hmm. But some are obvious, but we're still trying to play them down. Like, for example, you may going to have a 70% of income coming from one client and you're trying to just ignore it, hoping that they're not going to bring it up. But anybody who's buying a business that's very real to them. They're going to say it. So rather than avoiding the conversation about this should be brought up in early days of selling a business, pretty much at the beginning, and said, look, this is the business, this is how it looks like, and this is our main risk. But this is how we mitigated the risk, and this is why we think, this client won't leave. Gives the purchaser opportunity to work with you to actually find the mitigation strategies for this. Another big one is taking advice, professional advice after the event. It's too late.
Yeah.
So talk about the taxes. And Nick just mentioned taxes, and you mentioned one of the cases that you had. Get advice on taxes. Get advice on your legal obligations during the sale and post sale, because you don't want to come to the finish line just to figure out that your tax bill is much bigger than what you thought it's going to be, and then being unable to proceed with the transaction because all of a sudden the funds that you're going to receive from the business just won't be enough to do what you wanted to do, moving on from the business.
A really simple one as well that I've just had sort of come up on maybe 2 transactions was just like sort of maybe a misunderstanding from a vendor's perspective of how much time it takes and how many third parties you need to be dealing with in selling a business. And you also need to keep running your business during this whole period. So you're operating your business, but then you're speaking with Zoran, you're speaking with a lawyer, you're speaking with Phil. And sort of, I've had some things where I'm trying to call the client to get some information. They're like, Nick, why do you keep calling me? This is like, I'm trying to run a business here. And you sort of say, yeah, you're also trying to sell the business. And I think maybe just a little bit of a misunderstanding of how much,
how involving the whole thing is. Really, really good point, because if you prepare yourself well, the process is going to go faster.
Exactly. Yeah.
The longer the business sales process goes, more chances the business declining or just changing for one. And it doesn't have to decline. You may going to win this big contract and all of a sudden now, I don't want to sell it. Buyer doesn't want to pay for this future because it hasn't crystallized yet. So once when you decide to put a business in the market, make sure that everything is in order, and then the process can be very fast. Average time to sell a business is 200 days.
Yeah, thanks, Zoran. That was a really good point. And in terms of managing that expectation on timetable, one of the things that we often find is that when people are selling shares in their business, that they don't set good expectations up front as to what they're going to do towards the end of that transaction in terms of, well, how much working capital do I need? Am I going to access a dividend prior to the transaction occurring? And often deals can fall over at the back end because the offer which was originally made by the potential purchaser was made on assumptions that were completely different to what was in the vendor's mind. And we see that happen quite often.
You made a good point, Zoran, about reluctance on behalf of vendors to give full disclosure about the difficulties or the things that are, the worries in the background in the business. I've been assisting clients with a transaction, and the clients were starting to talk to the employees to bring them over. So I'm acting for the purchaser, and one of the employees mentioned that there had been a significant injury on the premises about 3 years ago. Hadn't been disclosed by the vendors to my client. When we started to ask questions, the vendors are currently the subject of litigation. The claim is over $3 million. And while we can work through the insurance aspects of that, and it appears that there is insurance in place to pick up any damages award made against the clients, the significant lack of trust that that has created, because the purchasers have gone straight to what else aren't they telling us? What else is there here now? We're uncomfortable. Will we actually still go ahead with the business? Whereas if that had been put on the table at the outset of, here are all the issues that are relevant to you, including we'll disclose this, we would have been working through it from an insurance point of view, and the effect on the trust between the parties wouldn't have come into question.
And that's normal course of business. You always got issues. You always got problems. And you know, like if you come and look at the business and everything is 100% right, you go, well,
There's something wrong. Yeah.
Something must be wrong.
Something is wrong.
Nick, getting the legalities in a business in order, getting it ready to sell, is often something that can be done in advance and really assist with a seamless transaction. What type of things do you typically look at when you're doing vendor due diligence to get a business ready to sell?
First thing's probably key contracts. Well, it's a very legal answer, I know, but most businesses have key contracts. That is probably a lease. Most premises that they operate out of, they have contracts with their employees, and then they have contracts maybe where they're with suppliers that they buy from, and then customers. They might have some key relationships with customers, which is where all their money comes from. And I think purchasers ideally would want to see those key contracts in a written form and that are easy to understand and reflect the sort of the business relationship that your business has with all these people. Having those sort of written, easy to digest, easy to sort of flow through, and here's the money from all our customers, it comes into our tax. When the accountant's looking at it, it makes it simple.
And I think looking at whether there's an opportunity, if key contracts are close to their expiry date, to renew them so that a purchaser can have some comfort that the income or the commitments are going to continue once those contracts are transferred. And I've also found that often when there are related parties, so the premises might be owned by parents or a related party, that the key contracts aren't formalised because everybody's friendly and they just move along, and it's all good until we're going to bring a third party in, and then it would be good to have that put in place. Zoran, are there any other sort of legal documents that you find can assist with?
What we're seeing a lot is happening, especially in mid-market and above, the purchasers are a little bit more sophisticated, and they're bringing larger law firms into the picture. So what happens then? They come up with this massive list of due diligence, and it scares sellers away. Just a couple of weeks ago, I received a call after we received the request for due diligence. He said, "We're not selling BHP here, mate." So, but advice to anybody who's selling: don't get afraid of that. A lot of those things are not relevant. We mentioned contracts a second ago, and there was employment contract for every person. Most of businesses won't have it. You employed somebody 10 years ago. What they've done then and what they're doing now, it's totally different. Just work through those issues. Everything you have it ready. And if you don't have something, just say, "I don't have it," and explain why you don't have it.
Yeah, and I think also intellectual property, so business names, trademarks, that type of thing, making sure that you've got that properly registered and ready to transfer is another big piece.
There's one good important point which often, especially in smaller deals, happens, is DA approvals, council approvals, because you may going to start a business. You started a business 20 years ago, business morphed into something totally different now, and you really don't have approval to run that business. Not that you can't run this business, but you just got to go and organize that before you put the business on the market. And it's just an administrational process, but it could take several weeks or several months. And if you're on pointy end of the deal, it becomes a problem. And often we see, okay, we'll hold some money until that's in order or prolongs the deal. So if you can fix that up in advance, if you can see, so the lawyers, accountants can help have a bit of pre-due diligence before you take a business to the market and say, look, okay, these are issues, we can deal with this, but this really needs to be addressed before we take a business to the market.
And Phil, often there is some tidying up that needs to be done, particularly in family businesses. What would you be looking at there?
Yeah, tidying up's a nice word for it. There's certainly some, let's call it non-recurring or discretionary expenses that that may need to be removed from the business on an ongoing business. I mean, equally, you can't do anything about the past. So, to Zoran's point earlier, I think it's just important to make sure that you're transparent and you disclose that. Because what somebody is looking to buy is a future earning stream. So, they acknowledge that, well, whatever's happened in the past has happened. But if they can kind of understand that and you build trust with that potential purchaser, then those types of things are usually understood. Because people, business people are usually buying businesses and selling businesses. They've usually run businesses before. They understand what happens in business. When you're selling shares in a business, there's probably a couple of things that are quite important to be managed early. And two of those things are assets that the vendor may wish to retain. Super important to deal with those early. You don't want to be trying to muck around transferring motor vehicles out and other bits and pieces just before, if you intend on retaining those. And the other thing which we see a lot of is director and shareholder loans with no clear strategy or plan as to how to deal with those. You can end up with significant unintended tax consequences based on having to deal with those in a short period of time versus a longer period of time. So having a clear plan about how they will be dealt with, either fully repaid or dealt with in the form of a dividend, is an important part of the process as well.
Fantastic advice. So, Nic, any final thoughts for somebody thinking about selling their business?
This wasn't on the question list that you gave me. I didn't have one ready.
While you're thinking,
thank you, mate. Save me.
I just want to say there's something I was mentioning earlier. What you're selling is a future maintainable income, profits, whatever you're buying. In fact, what you're selling is a promise that this sum of relationship, which what the business is, works. And as a seller, you've got inherent reasons to say that it works and it's going to be good, but that's not going to build trust. What builds trust is the evidence. So the disclosure, if you've got some recurring expenses that shouldn't be there, that's okay. It happens just about in every business. But as long as you've got evidence to demonstrate that that's happening, so collect that. Just don't expect that people are going to take it as granted just because you tell them it's so. So you have to have documents and evidence to actually prove that what you're saying is correct. So that goes into the tidying up. And I really think that before people take business or business owners take business to market, should have spent good time with their accountants, tidying this up, and with lawyers, tidying up their contracts. Now, back to you for the final thoughts.
I'll piggyback off that comment in terms of I'm seeing a lot more of like earn-out periods in business transactions at the moment, where you might have that sort of that trust relationship that you just touched on between a seller and a buyer. They're sort of saying, look, yeah, we think that the business is worth X, but we're not sure. We'd like maybe a couple of years working in it and trying to hit a target before we give you the rest of the money.
That normally happens if you find a risk within a business. Yeah. So what the buyer's trying to do is to de-risk that. I've got no problem paying you the money. But once when you're gone and this doesn't come to realization, well, I'll be the one paying for it. And that's when those earnouts come in place. Absolutely correct. They're becoming more often. And it's not as a vendor finance, but it's more to the risk, the potential issue that may going to crystallize in the future.
Great. Well, thank you to the three of you. I think my key takeaway from today is getting advice before you actually hit the market, and getting together a team of a really good accountant, lawyer and business broker who can work together behind the scenes to help you get your business ready to take it to the market, so that when you hit the market you've got all of the information that you need readily at hand. Anything that needs to be normalised has been normalised. The key contracts and everything that underpin your business are all being presented in their best light, and you're ready to go, is something that all vendors should be looking at doing before they go to market.
Can I just add one more thing before? I know we've short on time and all this. Getting advice on the value of the business before you go to the market is super important. It's not what you want to sell it for, but what the market will pay for it. So if you're planning with a few $1 million extra, so what happens? People put a price and say, okay, I want $10 million, but it's worth $5 million. Well, they already spent it in their mind. So have a realistic understanding of the value of your business. It will help you through the process, because you can plan your life after you exit the business.
Thank you, Zoran. And thank you for joining us today with our discussion about the things people should be looking at before they sell their business in our Law in Life series. Our next episode will be talking about wills and estate planning when you have people with disabilities in your family. We would really appreciate it if you would share the link to your friends and on social media, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Thank you.